Welcome back. So going through some of the questions in the chat here, we had a question about Victor Oladipo. Do the Heat bring him back? I I don't see any way that happens. I don't want to say any way, but it looks extremely unlikely from my point of view. What say you, Ira?
Actually, I'm going to go what says John Hollinger, who did a valuation of all potential free agents and pending free agents. He had Victor Oladipo's number so low in the $3 million range that
Wow.
I think if there is a bargain price available for the Heat love to bring back guys who know the system, who are already ingrained, who they don't have to begin the whole culture process with again. So, Clay, I could see if the price is low enough, lower than, say, the taxpayer mid-level, they have his bird right, so they wouldn't have to use exceptions, I could see him coming back. So the question there would be this, Clay. If Victor Oladipo is stunned by his lack of value, his lack of market price, and is available at that number, would you feel comfortable bringing Victor Oladipo back, knowing that Victor is not getting what he wants and is sort of felt that he's shortchanged and worrying maybe about an attitude? So, yeah, I think if you can bring Victor Oladipo back for less than $6 million, which I didn't think was the case, but John Hollinger is a former Grizzlies executive. He has all his formulas. I trust him, certainly to a degree, maybe not to a $3 million degree. But I think if the price is right, I think they could. So I think it's a matter of this might be one of those things that happens later in free agency. When Victor Oladipo sees, I think it's like 5 teams with cap space, that dries up. And they see the teams with the full mid-level exception, maybe 10 teams, and that 10.3 dries up. Yeah, I could see the Heat cycling back to that. So, yeah, I think there's more of a chance if his price point really is as low as John Hollinger at the Athletic projects.
And that's why it's Ask Ira, not Ask Clay, because Ira has more information in there. Okay, so
I just
here's the
read more.
trade. Here's the trade somebody mentioned that I really liked, although I'm not sure how possible it is because of what salary would have to go out and what player would have to go out. But it was posed, what about getting De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes? And I think to me, Ira, and if you do the math, wouldn't Kyle Lowry have to be a part of a deal like that?
And that's why I mentioned Sacramento in our last segment about the big trade. And could you do that? And can you get a De'Aaron Fox and a Rashawn Holmes and another player? And certainly Harrison Barnes could be, to go back to that analogy I made to 2005, it could be your Antoine Walker, and De'Aaron Fox would be your Jason Williams, and you can get a player for the Posey role. It could be that kind of player. And then remember, when that trade was made in the 2005 offseason, it's like, why is Pat Riley taking on other people's junk? And I can understand that. But sometimes you're building a team also. So while it's great to have a star, maybe Harrison Barnes starting over Max Strus would be enough in the starting lineup to give you a little bit more. Again, Harrison Barnes is not the Harrison Barnes of the Warriors, but Harrison Barnes of the Warriors, who is a third wheel or even a fourth wheel, fits a little different niche. So I could see that. So the question is, would you trade Kyle Lowry willingly? No. You'd want to try to give it another thing. But you have to have salaries that match. You have to be able to put packages together. Maybe you do need to shake this whole thing up. Maybe you come back next season with a lineup where you have De'Aaron Fox's energy coming off the bench, and maybe Tyler Hero proves to be more of a scorer and a more reliable jump shot, but you just need something a little bit different. Sometimes change can do it that way also. So I do find that interesting. And that's what I was trying to get to in our second segment here. You can listen to the podcast of the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show, is I do think that it might be the bigger, a lot of stuff deal where you and I are sitting here sometime in July and you're going, Ira, they didn't get a whale. Harrison Barnes, De'Aaron Fox, Rashawn Holmes, and like nothing excites you. But the entire package of it, I would argue then at that point, Clay, but it's a more complete and better rounded roster. Because there were times this season where the Heat did have to rely, God bless them, on the Struces and on the Vincents and on the Caleb Martins, where maybe you upgrade each of those levels just enough to make a difference. So I do find that kind of package interesting. And I'm almost leaning more toward that, except for the caveat I gave before. When you start doing those multiple player deals and you have to get matching salaries in it, that's when it gets really difficult also.
Jose asks about Donovan Mitchell. We talked about him a lot the first couple of segments. And I think the reason why you're going to see a lot more Donovan Mitchell is not just the fact that, we saw the pictures the other day, but the Heat need a scorer. And so it's like Pat Riley talked about a whale before. If you see a superstar, throw him my way, blah, blah, blah. Well, it happens to match up with what the Heat's biggest need right now. It's not that they need a whale to win a championship. It's that they need a scorer. And when you look at the three guys whose names you hear over and over again this offseason that are the perceived whales, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, Donovan Mitchell, three scorers, three guys who are wing players who are scorers that the Heat desperately need. So that's why I think it's extremely likely that Pat Riley shakes every tree to see if he gets one of those guys. If that doesn't happen, the guy that you mentioned last week that I've started to think more and more about that I think would just be a perfect fit on this team is Malcolm Brogdon. And when you start to look at the bigger trade, the poo-poo platter trade, as you called it, it's maybe who else can you get from Indiana, or what type of deal can you make with Indiana that wouldn't drain your assets, that you could use a couple of more assets to go out and get the James Posey type player, get the Antoine Walker type player.
Or you could expand the Malcolm Brogdon deal till now, and this isn't me, this has been on Hoops Hype and other places. Miles Turner's also been available forever in Indiana.
I just don't think that's what Spo wants to do. But
he's a stretchy four. He does have some athleticism. No, I'm not saying is you're caught in the 1-4 pick and roll, and all of a sudden that you have Miles Turner guarding your point guard. Probably not optimal for how you want to play your defense. But again, I'm saying what we talk about, if you're talking about the composite package kind of deal, is you can make a trade like that. You know, the Pacers have enough scorers and ancillary players that I think you can put together a package for a package deal with them. Another name I like, he's a free agent, might be a little over the mid-level, and he's coming off an Achilles, so we don't know. I like Joe Ingles. Now, I'm not saying that Joe Ingles necessarily is a power forward and can play up like that, but he's a tough guy and showed some toughness with Utah, and that could be another name also. Here's the problem. Unless we get a whale, you have people like Big O who are going to be droning on 5 days a week on his show how they didn't get the whale. But sometimes it's just the right fit piece. And I'll give you an example, Clay. Last summer, when the Heat got a guy by the name of P.J. Tucker, you'd agree with me, no one was excited, right? Everyone was like, the guy averages 6 points a game. The Rockets were terrible, right? Right? Be honest.
When they I love PJ Tucker, and I always have. But I looked at it differently. Like, man, that is like the ideal fit. And by the way, that's why I kind of bristle at any Miles Turner trade, Christian Wood. Like, I just don't see bringing in somebody like that. But no, it's getting away from your points. Go ahead and make your point. I like PJ Tucker, but I get your point. A lot of people didn't feel like it was a big enough swing to make this roster worthy of contending. Yes, I get what you're saying.
And yet it did. So it might be the kind of move where we poo-poo it all the way into camp, and then the light bulb goes off and you go, that's what Spoelstra saw. Because all of this, like you mentioned at the top of the show, whether it was going big, all this is through Spoelstra's mind eye. And you've got to admit, he has almost always found a way to make it work with whatever he's given. And then as he's gotten, I don't want to say more powerful, but more input and personnel, he then can find players to put into his blueprint who can do, and he speaks about this often, who he can get more out of here than maybe someone got out of that player in another place. So to me, it becomes, at a certain point in your career, you also are what you are. Has Harrison Barnes gotten so used to the losing that that's just who he is right now? And that's a concern. PJ Tucker didn't. PJ Tucker was on Rockets teams that were right there to the conference finals, that he had some success before they just crap canned the whole thing in Houston and became a play for the lottery kind of team. So you have to look at players that way also. There's a Malcolm Brogdon in the case now from where he's been. He was in a good Milwaukee situation, but they decided because of his injuries that they should let him go and move in another direction. So you look at that also. Is this player on a winning course, or is this player just accepting salary and statistics instead? And you have to look at it that way. There will be players available for the Heat. There will be a move for them to get a scorer, TJ Warren, something like that. There are players available. Is it enough for you, or can Spoelstra make it enough?
Okay, let me ask you this. The PJ Tucker situation, would you, numbers-wise, I don't know if you've crunched the numbers, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this is where I'd be okay with a trade like you mentioned. If you could find a way with your assets to get Malcolm Brogdon and Miles Turner and still find a way to bring back PJ Tucker, then I think that would kind of fit what you were saying.
But you absolutely can, because PJ Tucker, you don't have bird rights for, but you can give him what they call the non-bird exception, give him a 10% raise, give him a 2-year deal at 37 years old for $17 million. Probably as good as he's going to get anywhere anyway. His valuation, I think when John Hollinger did it, was around $6 million. So I think PJ, while he might have wanted more before, he realizes now at 37, if he can get that kind of money, so he opts out, he becomes a free agent. Oh my God, sky is falling. And then a week later, he's agreed to a 2-year non-bird, veteran minimum type of deal off of his contract. So he gets 2 years, $17 million, which some people might say, whoa, for a 37-year-old power forward, I might question that. So you can. Him and Vic, you could pretty much bring back without having to touch your exception. And if you're going to make a trade, it has to be dollar for dollar salaries. That'll be hard with a Malcolm Brogdon. So let me ask you this. Would you do a Malcolm Brogdon and Miles Turner trade if it cost you Kyle Lowry? Then all of a sudden, you got to question the point guard again, right?
Yeah, so that would be a no-go for me.
Okay, so that's the thing is, so all of a sudden your 2 point guards will be Malcolm Brogdon and Gabe Vincent, and you'd be where you were 2 years ago. Now, your chat, I'm sorry we get to the end of the show here, and then everyone will go, just bring back Goran. He's going to be a free agent, and at 37, you can have him back in the mix also. There are so many moving parts. It's not as simple as when you, me, and Big O talk about they should get player X. Whatever player X requires, there also could be an ABC. You can go to your Greek alphabet, Clay, and give us Omicron or whatever other letters you want there. There's going to be a lot of moving parts. Last summer, there were moving parts. There was not only Kyle Lowry, there was also the PJ Tucker deal and some ancillary moves. It's going to have to be, I think, the same thing. It's not going to be as simple as one move and we're done. I think it's going to be multiple moves.
So let's kind of put a capper on this thing.
Sure.
Pat Riley goes into every offseason, and there are multiple plans. By the way, I shouldn't say Pat Riley. It's the whole organization.
Absolutely.
I mean, Pat's obviously the face of it, but man, the amount of work that Simon and Ellisberg and Battier and everybody does behind the scenes to build this. There's always a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. I do think swinging for a star would be plan A. Because I think if you were to get somebody like a Donovan Mitchell, not only are you finding a way to maximize the Jimmy Butler window, you're also hedging with the Bam Adebayo window. So you would have the true number one in Donovan Mitchell. But for the next window, and you could build into the future with your undrafted free agents, your G League guys. I mean, you could spend the next decade surrounding Bam Adebayo and Donovan Mitchell with those types of players.
And you have first round picks the next 2 years. So you can give them also number 27 next Thursday and a first round pick, which you do have for sure in 23 as well.
So the next week is going to be really interesting though, because look, it's hard to envision something like this coming together this quickly. But I would think that whoever the Heat draft a week from tonight, that player would be fairly likely to be included in a deal if you have to end up going for if you decide to go for a whale. I think keep an eye on who they draft. Would that player fit potentially in a Utah, in a Washington? Because there's a lot of moving parts, as you mentioned. And the thing the Heat have now, which they haven't had for a long time, is the ability to put a lot of draft picks together. And Ira, you know this as well as anybody. The asset base and what GMs love these days, what they covet, it's almost like the mystery door, almost more so than
the unknown. And also because they can flip those assets for other assets. Clay, this is the last time until I think 2028, the Heat are in position to offer 3 first-round draft choices in a trade. Then the Thunder trade locks in and you don't have that. And so to put a capper on this, next week we'll be back with our first annual draft preview, in which Clay will give you all 58 picks through both rounds. But just to sort of put a bow on what you mentioned about the Heat maybe drafting for another player, the tell will come late Thursday night. Are the Heat flying the player in for a press conference on Friday to introduce him? Or is Tim Donovan, the PR chief, telling us, guys, we haven't decided when we're going to introduce our pick, so that's going to be on hold. I'll let you know. That'll let you know. The last thing you want to do is to have the player put on the Heat cap, sit next to Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra, and then 4 or 10 days later be dealt. So I think that will be the ultimate tell. Not when the Heat draft the player on Thursday, next Thursday. Not when the Heat, the player puts on that Heat cap. We've seen plenty of Heat players not with the right cap on draft night. But at the end of the day, is the player flying down tomorrow from Brooklyn for a press conference, or are we just going to sit back and see how this plays out? That will be your ultimate tell.
All right, and that is what we're going to look forward to for the next week. What you can look forward to after the break is more of the Big O Show. Thanks for hanging out with us.
You've been